going to be talking about today and how life changes. The topic today is a period of punctuated equilibrium. Let's talk about what that actually means, okay? It was, as Alex said, it was born out of biology. And basically the whole notion was that it was an evolutionary process. Actually, it was a follow-on to Darwinism. And the whole notion was, instead of gradual change, and most of the time we have gradual change in evolution, but all of a sudden, sometimes, and usually in history, in nature, it was brought about by a natural event. For instance, if you look at the Ice Age, if you look at volcanic reaction, if you look at global warming, whatnot, evolution happens slowly over a period of time, but then all of a sudden that equilibrium or that period of status just happens to get a shock. And when that shock hits, everything changes, and change ramps up very, very rapidly. Now, our notion is that in the business world, and in social science and in business, it was introduced maybe this whole notion around 15 years ago. And Michael Porter was a big champion of this period of punctuated equilibrium. Usually it's a once in a lifetime opportunity, especially for entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial educators. And I will explain a little bit more about how it will affect us, but think about the research opportunities that will avail. Think about the idea recognition that will come about, and everyone's life will change. Usually it happens once in a lifetime, as I said, but we are fortunate that's happening twice. And when I say fortunate, please don't take it the wrong way, that I don't think this pandemic was a fortunate thing. Of course it's not. I will tell you, it does change the way that society is going to be run for the rest of our lifetime. It's going to be a new normal. Every single sector is affected. And as entrepreneurs and entrepreneur educators, we have to recognize these changes, and how do we exploit these opportunities, not only for the betterment of businesses, our students, and society, but the betterment of all mankind. So I think that's very, very cool. So we had the digital revolution, and now we're having this pandemic 2 times in a lifetime, which is very unusual. So the whole notion of a punctuated equilibrium in the industry structure changes. And basically what happens in a mature market, you'll see that you really go towards a consolidated market, an oligopoly type of a market, markets that are controlled by few players, and fragmentation pretty much goes away over a period of long status or status quo, if you will, in the industry structure. But when that equilibrium is punctuated, like we're talking about right now with the pandemic, what happens is a whole new normal. What happens, it will gear towards a new structure that will be more fragmented, because smaller, more nimble organizations will exploit and take advantage of this new normal. So that's where we are right now. And think about it, every part of society will be affected. I'll give you a for instance. Look at real estate, commercial real estate. Just think about that. Think about now, almost overnight, everyone moved to working from home. And prior to that, there was a high demand on commercial real estate. In urban areas, it was forcing out residential. So what happened, residential prices went way up because it was dependent on commercial real estate taking up that space. Just think about now, think about the cities where people are learning to work from home. Now that will open up commercial real estate and allow for more residential real estate at more affordable prices in urban areas. That's just one example. Think about education, online education, ed tech spaces, all these areas. So it's going to affect all of us. So what do we do about it? And I think if you go back to the Timmons model, we talked, Alex talked a little bit about Jeffrey Timmons, a seminal voice on entrepreneurship for many, many years, good friend of Brian Dovey. And pivotal to his model was the preparation, the recognition, and also acting upon ideas and innovations. So I think where it's going to really come to the fore is that idea and opportunity recognition part of the whole equation. In your classrooms, you're all preparing your students very, very well, so the blocking and tackling will still be the same. But how do you recognize those opportunities? And I think one of the areas to really focus on are trade journals. Because if you look right now, if you look at every sector, they're saying how there's going to be a new normal. And in that new normal will create new opportunities. So if your students are really invested in a certain industry, they have a certain passion, go to the trade journals in that area and see where the new normal is happening. And then they have to recognize, by looking at patterns, models, what's worked before in other industries in similar situations, and then they apply those models and those patterns to new normal and to new business opportunity. So that's really exciting. And I think I'll just give you an example on the digital revolution, how it happened with me. I was a small business guy, and then all of a sudden there was a paradigm shift from analog to digital. But what I did is I looked back and I said, what opportunities would happen with digitization and what were the trends at the time? The trends at the time were globalization, consolidation, and international global consolidation and technology. Those were the three trends. So I merged those three trends, and we actually were able to exploit digitization and really transformed our printing company to be a graphic communications company by distributing print digitally versus analog. It was a game changer for me, and that was a period of punctuated equilibrium. I think there's also great opportunities in social entrepreneurship, and we can talk about that later. So really exciting times, once in a lifetime, and I'm excited to turn it over to Brian.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been lucky enough to do this a couple times with Alex in prior years. And when he called me this year and said, would you be willing to participate in the meeting? I said, absolutely. I then subsequently asked him what the subject was. And when he told me it was punctuated equilibrium, it's kind of not something I'm dealing with most every day. And I was tempted to call him and tell him the dog ate my Wi-Fi system, but I decided to fold and show up anyway. Without getting into the impact for a moment of COVID and how that's going to make a square change in the way we operate, I thought it might be useful just to trot through how entrepreneurship has really, and particularly in education, how it has moved more linearly over time. And even in the short period of time where I've had direct experience with it. So as Alex mentioned, I went to college at Colgate University with Jeff Timmons. Jeff, of course, is now known as a pioneer in entrepreneurship. He and I played football together. And then serendipitously, later on, we were together at Harvard Business School. He, as I said, really was a pioneer. But going back to those days at Harvard in the late 60s, there was only one course in entrepreneurship, and they euphemistically named it Management of New Enterprises, not wanting to use the word entrepreneur. In those days, entrepreneur was almost never used. I think I saw it once or twice in the newspaper, followed by the verb indicted. But other than that, it was not really very used and was kind of widely disparaged by the faculty. The faculty was very clear to the students that we were there to learn how to run a Fortune 500 company. We were not there to start a line of dry cleaners. So it was a very negative kind of thing. I remember that course. The only one really good thing that came out of it was an entrepreneur who liked to drink beer, and he set up a whole new set of bars called Your Father's Mustache, which was wildly successful for a period of time. And he was a fun guy and very successful. Actually, that followed on when I left. I worked for a large company, and then I did a startup. And that startup is one where, through a number of things, we developed the EpiPen, which is fairly common to people today. People that have an allergic reaction can take an injection and resolve the situation. But I remember describing the trials and tribulations of coming up with the EpiPen to a group of friends of mine in the Young Presidents Organization. And one of them looked at me and said, wow, you really are an entrepreneur. And I denied that, saying, no, I'm not. I'm a professional. I'm not an entrepreneur, and did not want that label. Later on, I went to did what I was told and ran a Fortune 500 company. And there I really found a lot of the entrepreneurial experience that I had really came in handy. Most people in large companies think in a very linear way. How do we improve profits by 15% or 20%? And I was able to make some changes where we were in 3 different disparate businesses, trading them, et cetera, into one coherent, focused business. So did use that, some of the lessons that I had learned at the smaller company. So where is it today? I just took a look at the Harvard Business School courses, and I see that there are some 30 courses at Harvard. There's some 60 at Stanford. Entrepreneurship is now a required course in the first year. So it is something that has become quite legitimate. And in my opinion, in talking with a number of people subsequent to that, it's almost gone beyond legitimate to be a little elitist, which concerns me. As I've talked to a number of deans of business schools, et cetera, they proudly tell me how many people apply and how few are taken, which I think is kind of sad. I really do. I think that you should be not proud of that, but ashamed, in my opinion. So one of the things I think I'd like to see us do is the perception by people of an entrepreneur as one that's born. You have to be born an entrepreneur. You have to be a genius. You have to be an inventor. You have to be a crazy risk taker and troublemaker. And all of this is not true. All types of people, all types of personalities make for a good entrepreneur. I've been very involved in the founding. I'm a director and was chairman of the Kaufman Fellows, which is a demonstration of the diversity of entrepreneurship, which was kind of an all-white group, particularly in venture capital. When I started, it's now got a great mixture of women, minorities, et cetera, and is clearly a meritocracy rather than a good old boy network. So at any rate, what does COVID-19 mean to all this? Well, it does seem to me that throughout this linear history, the wind has been a little bit in our face. Anytime entrepreneurs make a change and want to interrupt the status quo, it is extremely difficult. I have all kinds of examples of that. As Alex knows, we teach Invisalign at school. When Invisalign was first developed, which are invisible braces, it used an algorithm to determine how to move teeth in 2-week increments over time. This was very threatening to the orthodontist and was quite negative. So I often think you can go all the way back to Machiavelli, who said the initiator of a new system is the enemy of all who would profit by the preservation of it, and is merely lukewarm for the defenders who might gain. So that's it. COVID-19 is changing all that. I think one of the things that we'll see is a more acceptance of change and dramatic change, particularly in education. I do believe when this ends, things won't all be online. There will be a lot of face-to-face. Entrepreneurs don't think linearly, nor do they think in terms of decision trees. They're kind of, I think of them almost randomly, like a cyclotron or something. However, you can see telemedicine in my field is coming back, is really hot. And I think use of the internet, which has always been, will continue to grow. I think it's going to grow differently. To a large extent, a lot of the internet teaching has been taking what's already available, putting it online. But I think the internet can actually add quality to the whole process. And I know that National is working on that. Gangaram is one of the top guys working on it. So maybe he can describe it better than I can, for sure.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Brian, for your comments. And to our audience, I've been teaching with Brian a long time now, and that's he was one of the people that brought the EpiPen, that life-saving EpiPen, to the marketplace, and the invisible braces and many other commercial, what we take for granted today. He was with the entrepreneurs bringing those to market. Thank you, Brian. And now let's turn it over to Provost Singh.
Well, thank you, Alex. And you know, Michael described the concept of a punctuated equilibrium. And I think for us as academics, as professors, as curriculum developers, the stickiness that he's talking about comes from three factors. One, institutional culture. Two, vested interests. And the third thing is the bounded, rational individual choice. And I'll come back to those in a minute, because as you look at curriculum development, not only in entrepreneurship, but across academic institutions, these are integral to what we call stickiness in curriculum development. Let me give you an example. Our universities are structured in a way that monitor curriculum development. We have, and for the academics in this group and those of you who struggle to innovate in the curriculum area, you often have a program committee, you have a department committee, you have a college or a school committee, and then you have a university committee. And if you belong to a system, the system may even have its requirements for curriculum development. And these are all done in a way to satisfy our accreditors, whether it's the Department of Education or WASC or whichever regional accreditor you're coming from. But there is a set of expectations that are set by our accreditors that if you go through, the assumption is that if you go through this curriculum, that you've accomplished at the end. So it's not a matter of what you have mastered as a learner, but it is the courses that you have sat in. And so what we do when we develop a program, we tend to go through this alignment exercise. So we look at the institution that we belong to and we form institutional learning outcomes. Then it comes down to the program, and we have program learning outcomes. And the courses that feed into that program, we have course learning outcomes. And within the course, we look at what we're expecting the students to learn. And we have student learning outcome. And for those of you who belong to AACSB schools, that model fits really well. And the way that we monitor, the way that we look at whether we are satisfying this structural configuration is that we put this thing in place called assessment, right? We have our annual assessment, and then we have our 5-year reviews, and we make changes at that time, right? Or the logic is that we would put that through the curriculum process to make any changes that we want to make. And the goal is to have continuous improvement over time, but it's long periods of time, either on an annual basis or a 5-year basis. And we measure whether students are learning through these student learning outcomes that are tied to these program learning outcomes. And if you think about it carefully, it's done at the course level or it's done at the program level. So what we report at the end of it to show that we have done our jobs is that we say, you know, we want to improve communication skill, we want to improve opportunity recognition skill. We want 80% of the students to pass this assessment that we have come up with. And next year, we want 85%. And the next year, we want 90%. But it's still, the critical thing here, it's still at the course level or the program level. And that's because, to a large degree, our education system is tied to Title IV funding from the government. And so what we do, we have organized ourselves into semesters or into quarters to really correspond with federal financial aid requirements. And this great concept of seat time, right? So if you sit in a class for 15 weeks, then you must learn something. If you go through the curriculum, then you must learn something at the end. So the Carnegie units have been an integral part, especially of the American education. I know we have viewers from around the world, but specifically the American education system. So when entrepreneurship programs have actually done a wonderful job, I think, in terms of thinking outside, and Brian outlined the evolution a little bit of moving from something that we didn't want to hear about into, in a large cases, in some cases, a requirement in programs. And the area that entrepreneurship education has made some significant advancement is through the experiential component. So it's not just a lecture in the classroom. And they have done so in a number of ways. I mean, I've seen different institutions. You've all been creative in terms of integrated the 11 high impact practices into what you do. Incubators have become, you know, a stable concept in many entrepreneurship programs where you actually get to practice some of the things that you're learning. But almost always, these innovations or these skill building activities, these real competencies are co-curricular activities. They're not often a part of that 15-week or that 12-week semester or quarter that we talked about. And they're almost always tied to courses when we try to develop them. So for example, if the challenge is to finance the forum at the beginning, that often gets translated into, well, which finance course will cover that, as opposed to the competency. So now the student has to take a whole course in finance to learn a specific aspect of what they need or the competency that they need to acquire. So in the spirit of this conference, reimagine a world of entrepreneurship education where you unbundle the course into competencies. Just think about that for a little bit. You have rigorous assessment at the beginning of the course so that if a student or an entrepreneur, a budding entrepreneur, already mastered that skill, they don't have to take it. They don't have to pay for it. They don't have to sit and listen to us for 15 weeks. But they can start focusing on other competencies that they can build. So just reimagine that. I'm not sitting in a classroom for 15 weeks listening to things that I already know, right? How do we get there? Imagine this, no physical classroom, right? Pre-COVID, we wouldn't imagine a conference like this. So just reimagine if we can liberalize education to a degree where there's no physical space. We can learn at our own pace, our own time, in our own homes, in our own communities, at our own workplaces. And so, and then we become, what we could do is, imagine this third component. We then become the advisors, the coach, the service provider for students or for learners to acquire the competencies that they need to become future entrepreneurs. Just reimagine that world. And I think you'll see a very different curriculum emerging from that space. So thank you very much for allowing me to address this issue.
Thank you, all three of you, for your opening remarks. We have about 20 minutes or so for some Q&A, but I want to open up this discussion asking you a challenging question from your perspective at National University, okay? As we saw, and what continues to amaze me, we have experienced punctuated equilibrium that came upon us so suddenly as a worldwide academic community. And what I mean by that is, take a person such as myself, a 3-decade career academic teaching entrepreneurship, very comfortable in a face-to-face environment. I could walk into a classroom and treat it as my home. And I thought about online learning, and in the back of my mind, I thought about the learning curve it was going to take for me to transition my style to that environment, and I kept putting it off and putting it off until we get a notice that starting with your next class, you are online. And I'm sure a lot of academics, my academic colleagues around the world, can empathize with that experience. So punctuated equilibrium for many of us more traditionalists came upon us suddenly.
Yeah.
And here's my question for you, because at National University, you have pioneered online education. And so for what was punctuated equilibrium for the majority of the academic world was routine. I believe, Michael, you came out with a comment very shortly afterwards saying we're ready to go right now. And so I see it from your perspective, this is like incremental. It's not punctuated equilibrium because that's what you do. So with that introduction, my challenge question to you is, where does National go from here? Where do you see it in this environment, which you're used to playing in already? Where do you go? Where do you reimagine it from here?
Well, I'll take it first, and then I'll turn it over to Gangaram. But you're absolutely right, Alex. We were pioneers in the online learning space, and there's a lot of lessons learned over the last 20 or so years that we've been doing this. So I like to liken it to, if you look at a mobile application. If you have a mobile application that was developed mobile first, the user interface and the user friendliness is much better and it's much effective than when you have a program or an application that was developed for a computer and then you put a API or whatnot and connect it to a mobile device. It's a whole different kettle of fish. So what's happening now on online learning is we have the traditional learning that was, the sage on the stage, interaction. There's a lot more movement to mentorships and whatnot, which is very, very positive. But just taking that and putting it online does not mean that that's the most effective way to do it. So if you think about, and Gangaram touched on this before, that with 45 hours Carnegie units and whatnot, you have interaction in class when you're face-to-face. Have a really progressive, effective online learning experience, you need even more interaction with each and every student. And you need that on a substantive, regular basis. What does that mean? Think about when I was at State, Alex, I know you and I have taught classes that are 200, 300 students, large. And there would be 5 or 10 kids in the front row that would ask questions, usually the same kids all the time asking the same questions. You develop a rapport, you learn their names, but the rest of the students, you don't have really substantive interaction with them. Once you move online, you need to have interaction with each and every one of those 200 students. And there's a science to it. And there's a whole body of research on that. What are the best ways to interact with those students? Even the timing. And there's a science for students too. When do they answer the question? Are they first or are they last? Are they followers or are they leaders? I mean, there's a whole nuance that's associated with online learning. And so mobile first is going to be important. That substantive interaction is very, very important. And then where we're going, what's next for us is personalization of that experience. You see, with digitization and open online resources, we know when our students are hitting those resources, when they're reading their books, when they're assessing journal articles, and we use data analytics to say, you know what, history is showing us that unless they spend this amount of time on this chapter or this research or they get there this certain period of time, they're not going to do well in the class. We use that predictive analytics to reach out to the student and say, hey, you're lagging in these areas, and these actions are not going to lead you to success. And then we filter it back. We also take customized approach where there's around 5 or 6 different archetypes of learning. Some people are verbal, some people are written, some people are problem solvers, some people need formulas. And we can tell by like-type communities, even graph where they were educated in the world, what the best way to serve up that digital information, serve up that online teaching and learning and those assessments. So it's a very sophisticated process. So that's where we're going. Gangaram?
Yeah, no, that's spot on. And you see, the thing about it that Alex is, just because we have been doing it, it doesn't mean that we're not going to experience the effects of a punctuation. It speeds it up, and in as much as you're visionary and you're looking to where the puck is going, to quote a lot of other people, to where the puck is going, this will actually, as you said, it moves you, it compels you to move in that direction. The big difference I think that will come out of all of this is, this, what Brian referred to as selectivity. Traditional universities have established over a long period of time this concept that you have to meet certain minimum requirements to get into college, and that what that does, it leaves a large percentage of the population out, especially in the international community where we need education throughout the world. And so what this will do, it will remove those boundaries, a building, a place, a time, and a methodology towards making sure that everybody who wants an entrepreneurship education or to develop those competencies can do it. And what Michael described as our methodology is really a diagnostic tool to assess where people are. Regardless of where they are, we ought to be able to move them forward. I am not interested in taking an A student and marginally increase their ability. I'm interested in taking a student without any skills and move them ahead so that they can improve their lives, and then they can go into their communities and improve the lives of their communities and society as a whole. So this is going to push us in that direction of moving to serve those who have traditionally not received this education. And so that is going to be a big punctuation, I think.
Thank you. You know what impresses me about this, and our colleagues who are listening, I really want you to take note of what they're talking about here, because we spend a lot of time on enhancing our assessment practices. But in our entrepreneurship classes, we teach our students to be customer-centric, and we teach our students to use data analytics to better understand their customers. But when I think about where we are in terms of assessment, are we really using the kind of analytics that get to fundamentally understanding? I mean, you guys have taken it mass customization of this to a whole new level. So to my colleagues that are listening here, we've got to apply what we're teaching about customer analytics to our own business, to our own customers at that individual level. And I think that that's an important point to make here.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing some questions come from the audience, and one comment from my colleague James Speed, just up the road a little bit, focused on this notion of competency-based development. Competency to me implies experiential engagement, that where us traditionalists think of it that in that face-to-face. But how do we deliver effective online education that helps to develop the competency base that we're all focused on right now and developing in our students?
I'll take that. Brian and I had a long discussion one time about in entrepreneurship, I think and in life, I think one of the major challenges is assessing risk, right? There's no classroom setting that can teach you how to experience risk. You're going to have to do it, right, at some point in time. But we can learn from those disciplines that have introduced simulation to assess these conditions. So can we, out of a necessity now, create a risk assessment simulator, right? And put us through, use the technology, use the artificial intelligence to walk through a risk situation and see what the consequences are, right? So we have to reimagine the world, right? And think about how we can deliver these things. And that's where these punctuations will help us, right? Because remember, the reasons for this stickiness or the stasis that Michael referred to, they're institutional cultures, they are vested interests, and they are bounded rational individual choices. So you don't know what you don't know. None of us know, right? So to come back to that situation is that these are moments where we have to think. We've talked as entrepreneurs for a while, or entrepreneurship educators for a while, about not being boxed into a certain situation, to think outside the box. So this is where your imagination and entrepreneurs will help us to get to this next level, because this is just our limitations, Alex. These things you're talking about and the inability to go beyond the classroom, they're just our limitations. They're not anybody else's limitations. It is our reluctance to embrace these new opportunities, right? That's how we learn to do it, Alex. It's not a bad thing. That's how we went to school and we were taught to do it this way, right? But we just have to be, and sometimes something pushes you to get out of your comfort zone, right? And to discover this new world. You would have never imagined this conference in this format, right? So this is the movement.
Yeah, I'm very happy that you mentioned something, a tool like simulation. To our conference attendees, later on in this program, we will be talking about different tools that can be used, such as simulation. So be on the lookout for some of our later discussions that will take these into some other levels. I do want to throw something out about, we've been paying a lot of attention to what's called the Fourth Industrial Revolution, the emergence of these new technologies, artificial intelligence, you mentioned, drones, virtual reality, augmented reality, and all of these tools. And we're just playing around with these tools. And what you're suggesting is that maybe we should start reimagining, and how do we begin to integrate some of these tools into our regular teaching to achieve higher levels of effectiveness. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll just say something that we're doing over at National that's been very, very successful, and it has to do with virtual reality and laboratories. So basically, classrooms were bounded by the need of physicality for experiments, for instance. So we have a lot of science classes at National University, and we needed campuses, 28 campuses up and down the state. And then every time we were moving more away from the campus model, we said, what do we do about these laboratories and how do students experience? So we have a company that we partnered with that has virtual laboratories. And then we did a pilot test. And we said, okay, let's have a control group of the folks that are doing the lab work, biology lab work, typical stuff, physics and whatnot, in class. And let's have a control group of strictly online. The efficacy of the online lab was greater than the efficacy of the in-class period. And then we dug a little deeper and said, how can that be? Remember, in a physical location, you're not only bounded by space, you're bounded by time. You only have a certain amount of time in that laboratory. There's other classes coming in. There's other students coming in, 9 to 5. You're not there at 2 in the morning. What we found with our virtual laboratories, students were going to that laboratory, redoing their experiments over and over and over, trying different things at all times of the day and night. So the average touch points on a daily basis were 5 times a day students were going into that laboratory online when they were going in once every other day with a physical experience. So just think what that does. So that basically magnifies, it goes to what Brian said before, it's no longer a linear type of experience. Online, you can actually create this experience over and over again and grow exponentially, not just linear.
Right.
That's just one example.
Right, and also this is an opportunity. Entrepreneurs talk a lot about opportunity recognition. What we have done at National in this instance is to push the Board of Nursing, for example, that had an enormous amount of requirements in terms of clinical practices, right, and the hours that are spent in clinics, and to say, okay, now that we're faced with this situation, can we test? Because the mindset before, and I see you have a lot of questions on the mindset, the mindset before was that this is the only way that this thing can be done, right? And what this crisis is forcing us to do is to challenge these institutional cultures and barriers and bounded rationality, right? Is it really? And so we have a research team that is working on, as we increase the number of simulations in the nursing program, to go back to the Board of Nursing and say, well, maybe that is an erroneous assumption. Let's give you some evidence, some analytics that's the case, right? So it provides an opportunity to, this punctuation provides an opportunity for us to challenge these norms and these institutional boundaries and to move in that direction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Some real food for thought here. As I listen to this discussion, it's just forcing me to rethink assessment in such unique ways to better understand the outcomes, the learning environments. And I see some questions here on the competency-based approach. I mean, and we need to reimagine and to reassure ourselves with our programs. How do we know we're developing those kinds of competencies and mindset, competencies and mindset in our students?
Right, and you know, I know you have, Alex, I know you have some researchers on the group, so this is a golden opportunity, in my opinion. You know, they say they're natural experiments. This one, fortunately, doesn't happen. It's 100 years, you know, the cycle that has been in this case. And we have a very unique, as researcher, we have almost a responsibility at this stage to challenge these issues, tackle these issues. Measurement, and I'm speaking directly to those who are interested in a research sort of paradigm here going forward. Measurement, what is the validity and the reliability of our current assessment system in predicting entrepreneurship success? Is our current model a good predictor of entrepreneurship success? And so then back that into the competencies that are required. Now here's a reimagine this, right? Reimagine that every time a student takes an assessment on a competency, we can intervene, right? As opposed to the end of the course when they fail it, right? Or at the end of the year when we see our assessment result and then we're doing a forensic examination. It's pathology. It's looking back at what killed success, right? And trying to fix it in the next cycle. Think about doing that on a constant, continuous basis.
How powerful is that?
Exactly. That
is
reimagine.
So powerful in terms of condensing the time of learning about a situation and reacting to it. And unfortunately, in our current models, we react to it to impact the next group of students that are coming through our class or our program, as opposed to reacting to it instantaneously to affect the student that's sitting right there in front of you.
Well said, my friend.
That is truly a reimagined way to look at it. So, wow, this, I mean, we're just opening up some ideas here as our session comes to a close. But for those of us that are working on assessment plans, assurance of learning plans in our own universities, in our own curriculum, let's look to some thought leaders, such as the panel here. I'm sure you can reach out to Dr. Michael Cunningham, Dr. Gangaram Singh, and our resident entrepreneur in residence, Brian Dovey, for additional insights. We're going to close this session at this point to keep on our time frame. There are 2 new sessions that will be starting in 10 minutes. This group will keep this session open for just about 5 minutes, but the group will have access to the Q&A that's being posed, and offline they'll have an opportunity to answer some of your questions. So Michael, Brian, Gangaram, I'm so happy that you could be part of this experiment, because Michael, this was your fault that this thing happened to begin with. So my compliments to all of the great work you're doing, and let's continue to work together.
Alex, thank you for the opportunity. We're so proud of you, my friend. You are one of the seminal voices in entrepreneurship around the world. And when you talk about research, service, and teaching, you check all those boxes. And you've been such a leader in entrepreneurship, from leading all these great organizations. I think we all owe you some thanks. Thank you very much, Alex. Congratulations.
Thank you to everybody. And for our conference participants, come check out 2 more sessions in 10 minutes. And we'll see you at the virtual happy hour tonight, our social gathering. Thank you.
Right.
And take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
I guess what I'll do is I'll just talk a little bit about the